Rapid onset gender dysphoria exists. I know this is going to upset a lot of people, me saying this. It's bad. You're not supposed to say this. It's transphobic, but let's just be honest. Rapid onset gender dysphoria exists. We don't know a lot about it because it is a very new phenomenon. And detransitioners also exist. And I believe those numbers are going up. It's very easy to look at someone like me and say that I'm ROGD. This kind of came out of nowhere, I think, for a lot of people. It came out of nowhere for my husband until I showed him a lot of stuff from years ago that was a little bit trans. I've seen some people saying that the reason that there's been this huge spike in the number of people identifying as trans is because we've gotten better at identifying it. And that's been what happened to me. I didn't know what was happening in my... I knew I was sexually deviant. I didn't know how or why or what was causing it. Turns out I'm just a little bit trans, that's all. But I don't think that's all the cases. I don't think that's entirely what's going on. And the reason I don't think that is because I've heard so many detransitioner stories. And I think a lot of people are like, well, we shouldn't listen to detransitioners. They're anti-trans. They're transphobic. They don't want anyone else to transition either. All this crap. I listen to them. I think it's important to listen to them. I think it's important to listen to all trans voices and all trans experiences, because the more I get into the trans community, the more I see of trans experiences, the more I realize what a diverse group of people we are. There's a lot of diversity in the trans community. And it's not the diversity you would think it is. It's not the genders, the 1,000,001 genders that are out there. Oh, crystal gender, cotton candy gender, fox gender. It's not that. And I think that diversity probably should be examined more closely. The actual functional diversity within the trans community. Because I'm not the same kind of trans person as somebody who chooses to transition. There's a difference. I don't need to transition, which means I might not actually be truly trans, but I am an autoandrophile. So do I belong in the trans community? Do I not belong in the trans community? Should I leave the trans community? How does all that work? And am I somehow less trans than the genderqueer, agender, non-binary, whatever term they're using people? Because it seems to me that I have a clearer sense of my own gender identity than some of these people do. I can at least explain mine to people in a way that's relatively comprehensible. I'm trying really hard not to be overly critical of the non-binary cloud, but there are some problems there. And I don't think we should just entirely cut off all non-binary identities and say, oh, well, let's just pretend they don't exist, or let's just say that these people aren't really trans because they're self-identified and they make up a lot of these crazy pronouns that they expect everybody to use, and the pronouns change every other day anyway, and they call themselves things like circle gender or moon gender or whatever. The problem with cutting off all non-binary identities is non-binary identities give people who identified as trans and realized it was a mistake an exit route. If you told everybody in your high school that you're trans and then you realize that you're not trans, it's really easy to say, you know what, I think I'm non-binary, and then just slowly walk it back. That sounds horrible, but when I was in high school, there was one trans girl. And, biologically male, identified as female, started taking the hormones too. So this was How many years ago was this? This was 20 years ago. 20 years ago this was happening. And, I didn't know much about trans at the time. This person identified as female, started taking hormones. A couple years later, got off the hormones, had a girlfriend. Last I saw of him, he appeared to be identifying as male. And that was the last I ever heard of it. Detransitioners happen. Now, maybe he detransitioned because of social pressure and stigma, because he did deal with social stigma. I remember yelling at a bunch of kids who were bullying him one day. He came up and thanked me later. I was like, okay. But it's equally possible that the hormones just disagreed with his system, because that happens too. And maybe transition just isn't practical for some people. God knows it isn't practical for me. There's a reason I won't transition. And I should make an entire video about all the different reasoning behind my refusal to transition. I'm going to have to adjust this camera. And it's probably really difficult to explain that, especially in a high school. Hey, I identified as trans, but then I realized that, phalloplasty just isn't what I was hoping it would be, and I don't want to do that to myself. And top surgery looks really unpleasant, and I don't know if I really need to do that to myself, because, hey, sports bras, man, they're lifesavers, really. Maybe the pronoun thing isn't working for me because, people just can't get my pronouns straight, and I'm tired of reminding everybody. It could be stuff as simple as that, or it could be, and this does happen, I identified as a boy, and then I realized I wasn't happy identifying as a boy. I wasn't happy with people calling me him all the time. I wasn't happy wearing a binder. I just wasn't happy. And I realized that this just wasn't for me. And high school being high school, I imagine that it feels really, really uncomfortable to try and walk back, oh, I identify as a boy. So non-binary, a lot of people have said non-binary is a good place for people to just kind of walk it back. Non-binary is a good place for people to kind of put forward that idea, like, I think there's something going on, I'm kind of questioning, I'm kind of figuring it out. Non-binary is a good place to take a step back from it too and say, okay, I need to reevaluate some of the things that I've said here. I would not want to close off that exit for people, because it's hard enough. It's hard enough doing anything when it comes to your gender identity. I do not want to make it more difficult. But we do need to talk a bit about the way we classify gender, because I think that would solve a lot of problems. I think going back and looking at what we know in the historical research, and I know this is going to piss off so many people, but what we know from the historical research might be good to re-examine that. And I do not know that much. I'm learning as I go, so I'm hoping that you guys will be patient with me. I just had last week the most amazing conversation with a trans woman, and I was telling her about the Blanchard typology, and she looked at it and said, yeah, Blanchard wasn't as solid as people like to say he was. He wasn't as solid as he likes to say he was. Phil Illey, I was reading his book, he goes off the Blanchard typology. It sounds nice, but it's not as stable of a typology as it might seem. So that's good to know, and she was telling me this, and I really appreciate it, because I get people who, I had an argument with a guy last night, and I was agreeing with him, and he was still arguing with me, and it's like, dude, I'm agreeing with you. Stop arguing with me, please. But he just kept going, like, once he gets into that, I see people do that. They get into that mindset of, oh, you're on the other team, so I'm just going to fight you and fight you and fight you. And it's like, dude, shut up. I'm agreeing with you already. It's frustrating. And it happens a lot. And so I was so grateful to this woman, because she was really intelligent, more intelligent than I am, which always makes my life easier. It's like, oh good, you're smarter than me. Please explain it to me so that I can, break it down into kid words so that I can understand it. Pre-digest this information for me, please. So that was really nice, and she sent me a ton of articles, so I've got so much reading material that I've been kind of wading through, and it's it's not light reading, and so it's taken me a little while to get through it, because I was reading one of her articles that she'd written, and my son was sitting in my lap, and he kept on slapping my phone, and so I'd be like two words into a sentence, and then the phone would go scrolling away, and I'd have to like scroll back and then start reading the sentence again, and it was exhausting. Blanchard, I'm not sure what to make of Blanchard. Like, I like Phil Illy's book. I like his interpretation. I like his handling of the subject matter. Blanchard was a sexologist. And so Blanchard came at it from a very sexological perspective. And he's very sure of his findings. And I've listened to him in interviews. He's very, very certain of his findings. And Phil Illy's book kind of took Blanchard's findings, and he also combined it with a bunch of historical accounts and things. It was really interesting, and honestly, I think it was a good book. I'm halfway through it, so, you know. Phil Illy's take on it was that the experience of autogynephilia is not just sexual. It's sexual and romantic. And that makes a whole lot more sense to me. Now, I'm an autoandrophile, and so the way I'm looking at it is I have a female brain, and I am approaching my masculinity as a woman. You know, despite my best hopes that I could be masculine in my affections, I still tend to act a lot like a woman. And so autoandrophiles don't handle their philia in the same way that autogynephiles do. So I personally really liked that take on it, the fact that there is a romantic aspect to it. And the ways that he described the experience of autogynephilia and autoandrophilia align very closely with my own personal experiences, so it was really easy for me to understand. It's very embarrassing, but when I started reading the chapters on autoandrophilia, he's describing things that were extraordinarily personal that I don't share with anybody. In fact, I didn't share with my husband for years. For the first decade of our marriage, I didn't share it. The kinds of people that I'm sexually attracted to, the kinds of relationships that I have with those people, the kinds of sex acts that I do with those people in the bedroom. And I'm like, okay, well, now everybody's going to know that. That's just great. I will say there are some things that people did in the book that I did not do, but it was still, you know, am I inclined to believe the accuracy of the Blanchard scale when it is describing with incredible detail things that I thought I was going to take to the grave with me? You know, honestly, yeah. Yeah. That kind of makes me think that Blanchard sort of knew what he was talking about. You know, at least a little. He was scratching the surface of the truth. Let's just say it that way. He had some information that was true in the midst of everything that he was doing. So let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think we should take a closer look at Blanchard's work. And I know a lot of people hate Blanchard's typology because of Bailey, who is the author of The Man Who Would Be Queen. I have not read The Man Who Would Be Queen. I have no interest in reading The Man Who Would Be Queen. It just never really spoke to me. But the degree of vitriol that Bailey encountered from the writing of The Man Who Would Be Queen, I think I know what my next book review should probably be on. Let's just see what it is about this book that was so, I think dangerous is an appropriate word. But the other typology, and let me get to the reason why we need a typology in just a second. The other typology that's very interesting is the Harry Benjamin sexual orientation scale. And a lot of people are like, well, you know, Harry Benjamin was bad too. He was just bad too. I don't remember what all the complaints about Harry Benjamin were. I just knew that a lot of trans people are like, oh, he was sexist, he was racist, he did this, he did that, he was just a bad guy. I don't know. I don't know anything about Harry Benjamin. I just pulled up the Wikipedia article on him right here on my computer. I'm just skimming the surface here because I think that having a better understanding of what it means to be transgender is important. Right now we don't have that. Technically I'm transgender because I'm an autoandrophile, but I have no desire to transition. So the current definition of what it is to be transgender, yeah, I'm transgender. Future definitions of what it is to be transgender might say, yeah, no, you're not transgender at all, which either way is fine. I'm an autoandrophile. I know it. I know what I do. I know what I am. Do I care if I'm considered trans or not? No, I really don't. But looking at the Wikipedia article on Harry Benjamin, it says right here, Benjamin's patients regarded him as a man of immense caring, respect, and kindness, and many kept in touch with him until his death. Well, I mean, I don't know much about the man, but according to the Wikipedia article, I mean, that's a really good sign. It seems like he was doing something right if these people respected him so deeply. You know, I could be wrong, but it sounds good. Sounds promising, you know. As an outsider looking in, sounds kind of promising. Let's see what else it says. Goes on to say, the legal, social, and medical background to this in the United States, as in many other countries, was often a stark contrast, since wearing items of clothing associated with the opposite sex in public was often illegal, castration of a male was often illegal, anything seen as homosexuality was often persecuted or illegal, and many doctors considered all such people, including children, at best denied any affirmation of their gender identity or involuntarily subjected to treatments such as drug detention, electroconvulsive therapy, or lobotomy. Well, that just sounds like a real joy right there. Can you imagine how fun it would be to be trans and to be lobotomized because of it? Yep, nope, I'm so happy I'm living in the current day and age. Lobotomy it was always one of those things that I just never really liked the idea of. Like, my brain is scrambled enough. I don't need somebody coming in and cutting pieces of it apart, you know? So looking at Harry Benjamin's sexual orientation scale, again, we're on Wikipedia. I'm gonna leave the links below. He's got 6 different types, and this is kind of based off the Kinsey scale. And yes, I realize Kinsey did some really, really extraordinarily questionable shit, to put it lightly. I am aware of this. But, I mean, again, this is the information that they were working with at the time. So let's just see what they figured out. Because right now it seems like there's this trend of dismissing all the prior scientific, sexological information that was gathered on what it is to be transgender and just kind of saying, be free, do what you want. Identify as a cat if you want to identify as a cat. Identify as this lamp if you want to identify as this lamp. Identify as anything that you want. And that identity is free to change at any point that you want to change it. But everybody has to use your pronouns or they're a bad person. I think there's some problems with the current system. It's just me. So type 1 was transvestite, pseudo. Consider conversion operation not considered in reality. Type 2 was transvestite fetishistic, and they were rejected for conversion operations. Type 3 was also considered a transvestite, a true transvestite, but they were rejected as well, even though the idea could be attractive to them. The next 3 types were considered transsexual instead of transvestite. Transsexual, non-surgical, attractive but not requested, or attraction but not admitted. Okay, I'm assuming that when it says conversion operation with the question mark, they're talking about the opinions of the individuals who were experiencing these symptoms coming into the clinic, which is another thing we need to talk about. The pathologizing of being transgender, which is an issue that a lot of people complain about, and another reason that they usually just dismiss any sexological research on what it is to be transgender. I want to talk about that too. There is so much information here. It's like way too much information. I could spend years reading up on this, which is quite delightful to me, actually. But the 3 types of transsexual, non-surgical, they're attracted to the idea, but it's not requested. Kitty, could you not be messing up this right now? The second is transsexual, moderate intensity, requested, usually indicated. So this is where we start seeing the surgeries happening. And then transsexual, high intensity, urgently requested, and usually attained, indicated. So that's the scale. So the important thing to realize is that there is a scale of transness. There are the people who are extraordinarily trans, who really, really need the surgery. They need it, and they are going after it, and they are urgent to get it. And then there are the people who, they like cross-dressing. And they don't even really consider the surgery, but they do like cross-dressing. This is a broad scale. This is a broad spectrum. Now it goes on in the Wikipedia article, and again, scratching the surface, just scratching the surface. Benjamin noted, it must be emphasized again that the remaining 6 types are not and never can be sharply separated. Okay, so that means that it's a spectrum. Like, he divided it into 6 subcategories just so that he could have something written down for the literature, and it helps clinicians to kind of get a clearer idea of what's going on with their patients. I think it's important to remember that this was all research that was done by sexologists, psychologists, in gender clinics, in a clinical setting. A lot of people look at it and says, oh, well, this is the pathologization of being transgender. And yes, it is, but when these individuals were coming into clinics, frequently there was already a level of distress, and that level of distress centered around the experience of being transgender. I wouldn't show up to a clinic because I don't experience gender dysphoria. I have in my life experienced some body dysmorphia. It might be tied into my gender, into gender dysphoria. For example, there was that one time that I was sitting in the mirror, I was looking at my breasts, and I wanted to get a kitchen knife from the kitchen and literally just saw them right off. I wanted to do that so badly. It would be very easy to look at that and say, okay, that sounds like some gender dysphoria right there. But honestly, I think it was just body dysmorphia. I really do. I was extremely upset with my body, to the point that I was describing my body as a meat suit that I was wearing. I was severely depressed. I was not receiving the correct psychiatric care for my depression, the correct mental health care for my depression. And I mean, that was extremely recent, so if you go back in my videos, I probably seem like a crazy person for the last 2 years of my life, because, first I'm bipolar, then I'm not bipolar, then I'm bipolar, and then it's like, what was happening was, and then there, then it's postpartum depression, then it's this other thing, maybe I have this, maybe I have that, I don't know what's going on. That was because I was extraordinarily depressed, and every mental health professional that I went to had a different and incorrect diagnosis. So at some point I finally went into my GP and I was like, I need you to test my hormone levels, because there's something clearly very, very wrong with me, and I don't want to live the way I've been living anymore. I don't want to live like this. I've talked about this several times. He looked at me and gave me one of those, just a doctor's office basic depression screening. Like, are you sad? Are you agitated? Just basic questions. And I'm answering them, and, by that point I was off the charts. I was really in a bad place. One therapist that I talked to afterwards, and I was telling her about my situation, she was like, it's called situational depression. Basically, my husband had a brain tumor for 5 years, and I was dealing with his brain tumor for 5 years, and I became extremely depressed as a result. It was just really hard to deal with. And it had a devastating impact on our marriage. It had a devastating impact on his life. It had a devastating impact on my life. And I was experiencing the fallout of that. And for 2 years, I couldn't get proper mental health care, despite seeing multiple therapists. Which is really, you would think it would be pretty straightforward. My husband had a brain tumor for 5 years. I'm really depressed. Could these two things be connected? No. But during that time, yes, I became so depressed that I felt like my body was a meat suit that I was wearing, and I wanted to cut pieces of it off with a knife. I don't think that's gender dysphoria. I think that's body dysmorphia. They're very, very close. They're very close. This is one of the reasons that I think we should have classifications of transgender. I'm not saying they have to be solid, rigid, written in stone classifications, but I think we need to have a clearer definition, a clearer understanding, right now what it is to be trans is so broad and vague and fuzzy. And my deep fear is that many people who are going through what I was going through for those 2 years, depression, anxiety, anorexia, body dysmorphia of any kind, they're looking at what it is to be trans, and because the definition is so vague and amorphous, they're like, oh, I must be trans. And that's not a problem in and of itself. Changing your pronouns and then demanding that everybody follow them seems to be a rather annoying behavior, but, that's a different conversation for a different time. My concern is that these people are seeking out surgeries. ROGD people seem to seek out surgeries that are very, very drastic, medical procedures that are very, very permanent at a very alarming rate. So, for example, I'm an autoandrophile. I realized I was an autoandrophile. I realized that I am transgender. And I was like, okay, wow, so much of my life makes so much more sense now. This is really cool. I had all these questions and now I have answers to them. And I understand parts of my sexuality that I'm, number one, deeply uncomfortable with. But number two, it gives me so much more to explore and learn about myself. If you look at my old videos, like all my old earlier videos, if you look very closely, you will realize that I am wearing men's clothing in nearly all of my early videos. I'm wearing clothing that I've purchased in the men's department, and I was extremely nervous purchasing it because I didn't want anyone knowing I was purchasing it. And, for me, I thought maybe if I was very lucky, people would assume that I was purchasing it for my husband because I'm married and I have a husband, and it was like, maybe no one will notice that I'm doing this. And I didn't know why I was doing it. I couldn't figure it out. And it wasn't like it was turning me on to wear it. It just seemed to fit really well, and it was comfortable, and it was affordable too, which was also quite nice. I didn't understand. As an autoandrophile, discovering that I was trans, that's what changed in my life. It was like, oh, understanding, clarity. This is wonderful. I feel a lot more comfortable with inside my own skin, and I have a better understanding of why I'm doing the things I'm doing. This is awesome. ROGD, they discover they're trans, or they decide they're trans. Maybe they're anorexic. Maybe they're not really trans. They are struggling with something, and they want solutions. They want to feel better. ROGD talks about gender dysphoria a lot. I don't really know what gender dysphoria feels like. I know body dysmorphia. Not sure I have a clearer idea of what gender dysphoria feels like. Best I can approximate, I'll see men doing very masculine things together as men, and it's so beautiful, and it's sad because I'm not one of them, and I can't be one of them. And so I remember when I was working at Walmart, I'd walk up and I'd see a bunch of my male coworkers just, working together and being men, and there was this air of camaraderie around them, and it was like, it reminded me just so much that I'm not a man, and I can't be. And there was this sadness to it. That's the closest I've ever gotten to gender dysphoria. And I don't know if that's gender dysphoria as people talk about it, or if it's just, a little bit of melancholy. It doesn't hit me that hard. I've worked very hard in my life to be one of the guys, to understand male social interactions as well as I possibly can, so that I can blend into them as well as I can. I understand that as a female who is being read as female and seen as female, there are certain social interactions that I cannot perform with men because it doesn't work out. But there are so many things that I can do with men, and so I try to hang out with men, I try to socialize with men. One of the problems that I had in the manosphere, which, by the way, has anyone at any point up until now asked, hey, why is this woman in the manosphere? Because I have a lot of people who are like, well, what's her ulterior motive? What's she up to? Why is she here? She's a pick-me girl, isn't she? No, I just like being around men because I kind of think I am one a lot of the time. I realize that I don't have a penis. I am aware of functional realities. But I love being around men. I love hanging out in the manosphere. I love talking about masculinity. It makes me happy. It feeds my soul, I will never be a man, but I can have this, and this is enough. There's this sense of flowing smoothness to just hanging out with a bunch of guys. And as they get to know me better, I kind of find my way into their circle, and I fit in well enough. I don't need transition to heal me of any sadness. The things that I've been able to do in my own life, just as a woman, as a tomboy, because that's extremely accepted in our society as opposed to an effeminate man, I've been able to find equilibrium with myself very easily without any kind of medical intervention. That doesn't work for everybody, and I'm not going to pretend that it does. And I think that's why, going back to the Benjamin scale, we can disagree with a lot of things that Harry Benjamin said or did. We can disagree with the zeitgeist of those times that he lived in. Lobotomies for being gay or trans, very bad. I think we can all agree on that. Lobotomies, period, typically very bad. I don't know if there are any cases in which a lobotomy is a good idea, so I mean, there's an exception to every rule, but I don't know what the exceptions to that rule would be. But having that understanding, I think, is important, because there is this one-size-fits-all approach to being trans these days. And then you have ROGD people who might or might not be trans. And I know that questioning someone's transness these days is extraordinarily taboo, but look at the detransitioners. The detransitioners, at least some of them, are saying that they were never really trans. They just thought it was going to make them feel better. That is a matter that we should be conscious of. No human being who is not genuinely needing these procedures should have these procedures. I'm not saying we should gatekeep the procedures so that nobody can get them. If people need them, they should have access to them. But there are people who don't need these procedures. I did not need these procedures. People who are anorexic and think they might be trans because they feel bad and want to have these procedures because they think it will make them feel better, when really they need to work on their anorexia instead, shouldn't have these procedures. It's not going to help them, and it's going to physically alter them in ways that they might not really appreciate that much later on down the road, because if they're never trans to begin with, transitioning isn't going to help. A lot of people say these procedures are 100% reversible, and I've talked to trans people who say these procedures are not reversible. You cannot undo a double mastectomy. Yeah, you can get fake boobs. You're never going to breastfeed a child. And the sensation, like, that's one of the reasons I don't want a double mastectomy. I'm looking at it as like, well, I want one and I don't want one, and I need to do a lot more soul searching before I even begin to pursue that option. I've talked with my doctor about it. It might be something I want down the road in perhaps a decade. Maybe, maybe not. There are pros and there are cons. I'm weighing those out very carefully. I'm 36 years old. I worked as an exotic dancer. These things were my money makers for years. 8 years these things earned me money. And then I had 4 children and I breastfed all 4 of them. And one of the reasons I'm not pursuing a double mastectomy right now is because I might have more children. And if I do, it is so convenient to breastfeed your kids. If you can make it work for you, it's wonderful. It's easy. It makes life simpler. I know some mothers who haven't been able to do it, and it's like, you're not a bad mom if you can't breastfeed your kids. You are not a bad mom. So don't worry about that. But is it convenient as hell? It is convenient as hell. I'm 36 years old. In a decade, I'm not going to be having any more kids. So at that point, cancer prevention measures become a question. I'm at a very different place in my life than a 13-year-old girl. And people are saying they're not transitioning kids. That's not true. Because there is a 13-year-old girl who is filing a lawsuit in California as we speak because an 18-year-old girl, but at the age of 13, she got a double mastectomy. So it's happening. It is happening. There is legal documentation that this has happened at least once. And then there's Chloe Cole. Again, legal documentation that this has happened. You don't have to like Chloe Cole. You don't have to agree with Chloe Cole. You can call Chloe Cole as transphobic as you want to. I don't know if you've ever actually listened to the things she said or not, but it doesn't change the fact that she exists in the first place. That is a human being who should not have been medically transitioned. So there's two. I think that instead of denying the existence of detransitioners, we really need to listen to their stories. We really need to listen to the thought processes that led them down that path. I think we need to be more realistic about the fact that not everybody who says they're trans really is trans. I'm not saying we should doubt other trans people. I've been so happy because I've seen so many just richly diverse life stories from trans people who have had such different experiences that have all led them to this place. And it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. And I get as I learn more a sense of the complexity of being trans, of the trans community, and I'm really growing to love it the more I learn about it, because it is beautiful. And I haven't even started socializing with that many trans people, so I mean, I don't even know about that. I'm just looking at the stories, the experiences, the different lives that people have led, and there's a beauty to it. And I think that the very worst thing that could ever have happened to the trans community is the rise of ROGD. It's extremely destructive to us because so many people who have no business calling themselves transgender are saying that they're transgender. A lot of them are mentally ill, which means that people associate being transgender with mental illness. Like, it's funny, people object to the Blanchard typology because they say it pathologizes being transgender. He worked in a clinic with people who were struggling with pathology, so that is part of it, but, fair enough. He's pathologizing being transgender. Fair enough. But if you don't like that, then aren't you going to object somewhat to all the mentally ill people who are calling themselves transgender just because they're mentally ill and they don't know what else to do with themselves? Like, you see how that works, right? I don't know. I am afraid, honestly. I feel bad for the trans community, and I'm lucky. I'm invisible. I've always been invisible. I'm a bisexual autoandrophile who doesn't feel a need to transition. I am as invisible as you possibly can get in the LGBT community. I'm married. I'm on the surface level, I look very, very straight, and I hate using the word cisgender, but cisgender. No one would ever assume there's anything about me that's the least bit non-vanilla or kinky or different. The backlash that I see brewing against the trans community, the damage that I see being done to the trans community, I don't think it will affect me personally. But it will affect some of the people that I've met who don't deserve to be caught up in that backlash. It will affect LGBT people that I know and care about, people that I love, people that I've known at various parts of my life who have been very kind to me. I was thinking about it last night, and just about any time in my life that I've been isolated and alone and misunderstood and poorly treated and just in a very low place in my life, there's been some person, L, G, or B, actually it's been one of each, who's kind of come out of the woodwork and been very, very kind to me and been a friend to me, and I appreciate it deeply. I have not known much kindness in my life, and I will never forget these people. I don't want LGB people getting roped into the mess that is going on in the trans community, because the trans community is there is a dumpster fire right now, okay? And at the same time, I see some really awesome trans people who, they're struggling against this terrible messiness that we have right now. And I mean, a couple voices in the middle of a maelstrom are inevitably going to be drowned out. And it's sad to me, and so I'm talking about this because it's all I can do. ROGD is the worst thing that could possibly have ever happened to the trans community. And it doesn't matter if you're one of those people who's looking and saying, well, ROGD doesn't really exist. It's just that we've gotten better at detecting what it is to be trans. And I mean, that's how I figured out I'm trans. So, I mean, I can't criticize it too much. I know I'm trans now because everybody was talking about it, and suddenly it was like, oh yeah, that's what's going on. Cool. All right. Now I get it. But I don't think that's what's going on in 100% of these cases. In fact, I don't think that's necessarily what's going on in a majority of these cases. But say that it is. Say that 99.99% of the cases of ROGD that are popping up right now are not people with depression, anxiety, OCD, anorexia, any of these other disorders. It's not mentally ill people or maladjusting teenage girls or any of these other things that people are saying that it is. It's not any of that. It's just people who are genuinely trans who are suddenly realizing, oh yeah, so that's what's going on. Cool. These people would never have come to that conclusion if it wasn't so widely talked about. I would never have come to that conclusion if it wasn't so widely talked about. I would have been mystified by my sexuality until the day I died, which is really frustrating, and I'm kind of happy that I'm not. But do I need to transition? No. Am I going to transition? No. Would it be good for me to transition? I do not think it would. So when I look at all these people who are transitioning right now, new pronouns, hormones, surgeries, is this the best way for them to approach their transgender identity? You really got to question that. We really got to question that. And then I go back to the Benjamin scale. And you can hate the Benjamin scale, and you can say it's transphobic, and it comes from a time when being trans got you lobotomized. And I mean, it did come from a time when being trans got you lobotomized. But he made a very interesting observation when he said, there are different intensities of this shit. There's different degrees of intensity in transgender individuals. Some of them really don't need sex changes, and some of them really do. And the question then becomes, how do we best serve all of these individuals? And I think that's a really important question. Because trans people, regardless of the type of trans, whether they're HSTS or AGP or ROGD or some other thing, I don't know, they all deserve to be given a variety of healthy options that will give them the kind of life they desire. And you would think that transition would be the best option out there. But I don't think it is all the time. It isn't for me. transition has risks that are associated with it. There are health problems. Not everybody can transition because of health issues. What are those people supposed to do? How are those people supposed to cope? These are questions that need to be addressed. There's a lot of weighing of pros and cons that needs to take place. There's a lot of understanding of what it is to be trans that we do not currently have. And I would very much love to see it if the trans community was a place where people could feel more comfortable opening up that discussion. Because right now I think I have been warned that if I talk about some of these things too much, I will get death threats. And, well, I've already had neo-Nazis sending me threats and making videos about what a horrible person I am. So if members of the trans community want to send me death threats and talk about what a horrible person they think I am, you are welcome to get in line with the neo-Nazis who also hate my guts. I'm not sure if that's the company you want to be in, but I hope other people can join me in this discussion. I hope we can start talking about what to do about the ROGD problem, because it is a problem. There are people who are detransitioning. That's bad. There are people who are saying, my teenage daughter suddenly says she's trans, so do all of the friends in her little friend group at school. That's bad. Because not all of those kids are trans. It's not statistically likely. I understand that more trans people are likely to hang out with other trans people, but there's a statistical element to this that is alarming. Are all of these teenage girls really trans? Really? Really? Maybe they're just AAP like me. Maybe they're all out of androphiles. Maybe they all really get turned on at the idea of being men. Cool, you know? Hey, I'm definitely not going to tell you not to do that. As you're a teenager and growing and exploring your sexuality. I'm going to say, hey, if that's where you're at in your life right now, maybe you don't want to have bottom surgery just yet. Just a thought. There's a scale of intensity here. There's a spectrum of intensity here. Benjamin's comments on how you can't really separate these into specific individual groups, it's a spectrum. Like, he's separating it out for clinicians so that if they're giving clinical care to individuals who are coming to them saying, I think I'm transgender or transsexual was the term they used at the time, then they can kind of look at the scale and get a basic idea where on that scale someone falls. It's a spectrum. People who are at the low intensity end of the spectrum should not be given life-altering surgeries. They don't need them, and it's not going to help them. Can we just talk about that a little bit? It seems like a really big issue, and it's not socially acceptable to say this. And that's a problem. Because I think we're just heading towards this precipice where eventually we're going to fall right off into the world of all these people are detransitioning and trans people indoctrinated them, which is bad. And, are trans people indoctrinating children? That's another question you're not supposed to ask. And I think that's another thing that we really, really need to be talking about. So that's my thoughts for now. I've talked too much for today. My husband keeps telling me that if I want to make money, I need to make shorter videos and just divide my thoughts up into short videos. If I could organize my thoughts, I probably would. For now, this is it. And hopefully no one sends me death threats for making this video. If they do, what are you going to do, I hope you all are having a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later.